O nosso programa já vai começar, mas antes eu quero te convidar para se tornar membro do nosso canal aqui no YouTube. Por R$ 14,99 por mês, você tem acesso a conteúdos exclusivos, aprofundando os assuntos mais importantes do momento. E você já segue o IB nas redes sociais? O seu apoio é muito importante para nós. Desejamos a todos um bom programa.
Boa noite a todos e todas, sejam muito bem-vindos ao nosso canal no YouTube. Eu sou a Carol, gerente de educação do Instituto Brasil-Israel, e hoje estamos aqui promovendo mais uma aula aberta com o tema Entre normalização e conflito, o Mundo Árabe e Israel hoje. Eu aproveito para te convidar a se inscrever aqui no nosso canal, curtir e compartilhar essa live. E se você gosta do trabalho do IB, aqui na tela a gente tem um QR Code, é só apontar a sua câmera e você pode contribuir com o nosso trabalho para que a gente continue realizando atividades como essa gratuitamente. Toda contribuição é bem-vinda e apreciada. Bom, nosso convidado de hoje é o professor Haisam Hassanein. Ele é especialista em Oriente Médio, analisa as questões entre Israel com países árabes e muçulmanos, foi pesquisador na Foundation for Defense of Democracies e no Washington Institute for Near East Policy, onde se concentrou nas relações egípcio-israelenses na política dos Estados Unidos com os países árabes. Ele é mestre em História do Oriente Médio e da África pela Universidade de Tel Aviv e foi o primeiro egípcio a ser nomeado orador da turma de pós-graduação por uma instituição acadêmica israelense. A nossa atividade hoje ela vai ser conduzida em inglês, com uma exposição inicial do professor, mas vocês podem enviar perguntas ao longo da exposição aqui no chat, tanto em inglês quanto em português, e nesse caso nós faremos a tradução para o professor Hassanein. Bom, no final da exposição ele irá respondê-las. Então, a partir de agora a gente vai seguir em inglês. Good evening, Professor Hassanein. It's a pleasure to have you here today with us for this lecture. As I was saying before in Portuguese, the chat is open for questions, so we can address them at the end of the lecture. So the floor is yours to begin. Thank you so much, and please, welcome.
Thank you so much, and good evening to everyone, and a pleasure to be with the Brazil-Israel Institute. So today I will try to briefly walk you through how Arab-Israel relations have evolved since the October 7th crisis in 2023, a moment that really shook the entire region. As you all know, on October 7th of 2023, Hamas launched a brutal and unprecedented attack on Israel. This was not just another round of violence. It was let's call it a shock to the entire system. The scale of the attack, the civilian deaths, and the hostages that were taken caught not only Israel by surprise, but also Arab governments and public all across the region. Why? Because it happened at a very delicate moment. Over the past few years, we saw a growing momentum for normalization between Israel and several Arab states. The Abraham Accords that were signed back in 2020 had already brought Israel into formal diplomatic relations with 4 Arab countries: United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. And most significantly, before October 7th, just few weeks or few months, there were active U.S. brokered talks underway between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Talks that, if got finalized, could have dramatically reshaped the region. Then all of a sudden, October 7th happens. The Hamas attack, the devastating war in Gaza that followed, suddenly put all of that on hold and on question. So now, let me give you a briefly, how did Arab governments react? If you look closely, most Arab governments condemned the violence against civilians, but were very careful not to fully endorse Hamas. Egypt and Jordan, for instance, both which already have peace deals with Israel, and I always call them the first generation of Arab peacemakers, voiced strong concerns about the scale of Israel response in Gaza, but they kept diplomatic channels open. And I think this was very significant because if you go back 20 years ago, whenever there was some sort of escalation between Israel and Hamas or other Palestinian groups, or in Lebanon, for instance, these governments used to withdraw their ambassadors as a way to pressure Israel to stop the response back. This time did not happen, and I think the reason for that was because of the Abraham Accords. Before the Abraham Accords, Egypt and Jordan were the only Arab governments in town, and I would say that they had some sort of flexibility to do whatever they want when it comes to the relations with Israel. But now, after the Abraham Accords, you had extra 4 Arab countries that really invested more than Egypt and Jordan in relations with Israel when it comes to economic ties, military ties, security ties, and even diplomatic ties in the region. And they talk openly about it. So there was some worry in Cairo and Amman when it comes to being replaced or losing their leverage as the mediator with the Israelis and the Palestinians when it comes to such conflict. And this is why they stayed in town. If you look a little bit and move to the Gulf states, I would say that they even faced a trickier balancing act. For example, in the case of United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, which had boldly normalized relations with Israel, as I mentioned, in 2020, they continued to engage quietly, even as their publics expressed strong sympathy with the Palestinians. You could sense that on social media, you could see it on television, and a little bit on the streets. As for the Saudi Arabia, which was on the verge of signing the Abraham Accords, as I mentioned earlier, paused those talks, but also I think in a positive note, it did not slam the door shut completely. They kept it a little bit open. Obviously, in the case of Qatar, I would say the situation was a little bit different because it has been supportive of Hamas even before October 7th. They have been funding them. So if you look at statements coming from their governments, I would say that it was unlike moderate Gulf states. But obviously, they played a bigger role when it comes to the hostages negotiations, or even brokering a ceasefire. But in general, their media was the most critical of the whole situation and very supportive of Hamas during the conflict. So what does this tell us? I think, especially in the moderate Arab camp in Israel, as I explained, it shows a real divergence between public opinion and government policy. In much of the Arab world, there is public outrage because the suffering that has been happening in Gaza, it looks tense to them on television, and in some cases, some massive protests erupted in some countries, even though the governments over there were very quick to contain that. But at the leadership level, I would argue that many Arab governments still remain focused on their strategic calculations. And for many of them, this strategic calculation is Israel is not the primary threat, Iran is, and it's followed by the Muslim Brotherhood. And if you zoom out, you will notice something interesting. Even during if you zoom out and you look at let's argue that this, if you zoom out, this will make the regional picture becomes even more complicated. Many Arab states see Hamas as closely linked to Iran's broader regional agenda, though through its so-called axis of resistance, which includes, as you know, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and various proxy groups in Iraq and Syria. So while Arab leaders may criticize Israel action publicly, many are privately very uncomfortable with the growing power of Iran's proxy network, which October 7th exposed in full force. And this will take me to the point that I was just about to mention. If you zoom out, you will notice something interesting. Even during this war, security cooperation between Israel and some Arab states, particularly on intelligence matters, has quietly continued. This shared interest is because countering Iran has not disappeared. If anything, for some Gulf leaders, the events since October 7th have reinforced the belief that there is discrete need for coordination with Israel. Of course, this does not mean that normalization will fully resume the next day, but still it's very important for them to navigate their own domestic publics who are angry and deeply sympathetic to the Palestinian. So I wouldn't argue that normalization has collapsed, but I would argue it's more on a pause for now, waiting for the right moment and for the right diplomatic package and for some form of progress on the Palestinian issue so they can sell that to their own public. So what does this tell us about the way forward? I would argue that the Arab-Israeli conflict is no longer defined by the terms of the past. We are seeing a web of shifting alliances where national interests, not ideology, are driving decisions. Arab governments remain cautious but pragmatic. They see value in cooperation with Israel, especially on security and technology. But they also know that ignoring the Palestinian issue entirely is politically risky at home. Obviously, before October 7th, if you analyze the Arabic domestic discourse, I would say that the Palestinian discourse retracted by a way or another, because there was some sort of a loss of hope that Hamas will be gone anytime soon, or there is going to be a unity talk between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. So you have like a one unified Palestinian bloc, so they could go to the international community and say, let's talk about the two-state solution. And here comes, by the way, if you heard about it, and I think I wrote a few pieces about it, about the Arab League condemnation of Hamas. I think it was a very historic step. It was passed a few weeks ago, and I think the official statement should have been released 23 months ago, when the October 7 massacre took place. So while it's too late, but it's better than not coming at all. And if it happened right away after the massacre was committed, I think it could have put immense pressure on Hamas and its regional backers. From day one of the conflict, we could have had the hostages released all the way, and we could have avoided prolonging the conflict till now. But still, I think it's still a significant step for few reasons. One, for years, in the minds of many people in the Arab world, the so-called armed resistance was seen as a tool to achieve a two-state solution. This recent Arab League declaration, it shows for the first time the path of political statehood over armed struggle. For years, even though some Arab governments knew that Hamas is doing the wrong thing, but they refrained from publicly condemning that. And this is why I think it's very significant and deserves so much attention, because it means that the continuation of Hamas' existence and owning weapons is becoming an obstacle to a Palestinian state, in the words of the Arab League. And if you look in the past, before October 7th, whenever Hamas and the Palestinian Authority used to be invited to Cairo for unity talks, so both sides can go back to the Israelis, to Washington, or even to the Europeans, and we say, here we are united, and we want to negotiate a two-state solution. Hamas used to be the obstacle to that. Simply, as you may know, and many know, they don't believe in the existence of Israel in the first place, and also they don't even believe on having a just two-state solution for both Israelis and Palestinians. Another significant point in this Arab League declaration is putting pressure on countries that have been backing Hamas. And I mean, in this case, Turkey and Qatar. Both of them signed the declaration, which I think is very significant. Two, it would be embarrassing for both of them to back Hamas from now and so on against the will of their Arab partners. And three, it will start to put pressure on both nations to force Hamas to put down its guns and leave Gaza for others to rule. But overall, I think the declaration is a good step also. But there has to be homework done by Arab leaders as well. The declaration is good, and I think it's a historic step. But whenever I talk to people in Israel after the declaration, and I used to send them the news, I used to get surprised that many tell me that they have not heard about it, they have not seen it, which has reminded me of the Arab Peace Initiative 2 decades ago when it was passed, and it never succeeded to get into the Israeli society mainstream-wise, and many people talk about it. And it used to be my surprise when I used to live in Israel as well. Many people either didn't know much about it, or heard very little about it, or had very fuzzy information about it. And I'm worried that if the same thing could happen with the Arab League declaration. So really, I think one bold step should be done by Arab leaders is to break the taboo of not talking with the Israelis directly. They should start to talk to them directly and engage them. If you visit countries in the Arab world, one of the complaints you always hear from the Arab side is that Israel is heading toward the right, or the ultra-nationalist ministers are the ones who are controlling the rhetoric there. So, okay, why don't you start engaging and talking to the public directly? This way, one, you create internal debates within the Israeli society. Two, by a way or another, you're going to have some interest groups that aligned with your interest and really interested in talking to the other side and having peace. And this will put the Israeli society and create a debate within the Israeli society on a very important question. What kind of decisions should their government be making? So they, from now on, they could get integrated within the broader region and succeed to have peace with the Palestinians. So I think one of the things that I recommended in an article I wrote lately was that Arab leaders should try to do something similar to Sadat, historic, when he decided to go directly to the Israelis and talk to them in the Knesset. So why don't the Saudi leader, MBS, invite a crew of Israeli journalists from different newspapers, invite media professionals from different channels within Israel, and have an exclusive interview with him in Riyadh. I could imagine if it's being subtitled and translated into Hebrew, I'm sure many people in Israel are already fascinated by this young leader in Saudi Arabia and will be curious to hear what he has to say. And once they hear it, they will really rethink it, and it could really create some sort of conversations between the biggest Muslim country and the only Jewish state in the region. And really, we could have some serious steps forward. But yeah, and this overall, I think I wouldn't call it even the Arab-Israeli conflict as many people used to see before, because many governments in the region nowadays really forward-looking and not driven by ideologies that used to control capitals in the past. And just to explain it in very plain terms, 20 or 30 years ago, the Arab world power used to be centered in capitals like Cairo, Baghdad, and Damascus. Cairo was controlled by, before Sadat, obviously, was controlled by Nasser, who was aligned with the socialists and the communists. So this was an ideologue. The Iraqis or Baghdad was controlled by Saddam Hussein, and everybody knows his ideology, and the Syrians by Al-Assad family, and everybody knows how ideologue they were. Today, the power center in the Arab world is shifting toward Gulf, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. I would argue Qatar a little bit because it has its own media influence. But the good thing is, at least in Saudi Arabia and countries like United Arab Emirates, you have young leadership there, moderate, forward-looking, focusing on economy and flourishing their own societies and making sure the region they live on moves to the better. And this is good because they see Israel part of the equation. And I think this is very important and very significant to push for and cherish. Yeah. Another topic also I want to touch base on is the Egypt, Hamas, Gaza situation for the audience. If you look back before October 7th, when it comes specifically to Egypt, Egypt was in the past 10 years before October 7th was having a socio-economic crisis. The country gone through the Arab Spring in 2011, and ever since had some political turmoil in the country. They had the Muslim Brotherhood government came for a year, and then a coup happened in the country in 2013, and then ended up being elected. The general who did the coup in 2013 ended up becoming an elected president in 2014. And for 10 years, he has been busy with terrorism inside his own country, which led to lots of cooperation between him and Israel. And the amount of trust that was created in this 10 years between the Egyptian leadership and the Israeli leadership really served what happened after October 7th. And I'm going to explain that in a bit. But 10 years, by 2013, like let's say 9 years after he came to power, or 10 years, the Egyptian leadership was struggling to justify to the public what it done for them, because the public were looking around them in the country. The country got poorer, inflation got way worse, and no opportunities. And the percentage of the youngsters in the country has grown significantly, and there was no political opening in the country too, because for one way for the regime to survive in the past 10 years was to kill the political spectrum, the political space in the country. So no debates, no conversations, nothing. They only ruled by an iron fist. And people were looking, and started to get frustrated, and the regime started thinking about creating open political dialogue in the country, having a human rights dialogue, or even opening the political system a little bit. And all of a sudden, October 7th happened, and it reinvented the regime status, because everybody became very busy with the situation in Gaza. The Palestinian cause, by a way or another, re-emerged in the media. And the government, pro-government media really capitalized on that and started to talk about that more often than before. And the government encouraged that because it will keep the people busy with dramatic events happening around them in the region. And even when it comes to foreign policy, I would argue that when President Biden, which October 7th happened under his term, when he came to power, it took him like 5 to 6 months to call the Egyptian leadership. 20 years ago, whenever an American president used to arrive to the White House, one of the first leaders in the Middle East he would call was the Egyptian leader, or Cairo, simply because they used to be the ones involved in the Palestinian-Israeli peace talks, and this was very important for Washington. So here we go, October 7th happened, the Israel-Palestine thing comes to the fore one more time, and Egypt becomes a very important international player when it comes to Middle East politics. So one of the things that October 7th crisis, to explain, and I'm going to be open to questions, but this is how I see it. One of the things that were revealed after October 7th was the Egyptian security failure. to deprive Hamas of smuggling weapons. My assessment is that this was done intentionally by Egypt. In the last decade or so, as I mentioned earlier, the regional influences waned heavily, and even within the Palestinian arena, which used to give Cairo lots of power in the global stage, countries like Qatar and Turkey and Iran started to replace it. The Qataris gave Hamas the money. The Turks gave Hamas houses and hosted them on their territories. And the Iranians offered Hamas military training, while Egypt didn't have much. Actually, Egypt was against Hamas because the current Egyptian regime was a regime that came after ousting or overthrowing a Muslim Brotherhood government that was very supportive of Hamas. And by the way, Hamas is considered in Egypt the military wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. So one of the ways for Egypt to reinvent or have some leverage like other regional backers for Hamas in the region, it had to turn some blind eye on some of the Hamas illegal border activities, and this to compete with others. Obviously, October 7th, they never imagined could happen, and it could lead to this catastrophe and actually the scandal that followed. Another thing Egypt has been thinking about or advocating for since the crisis happened was not taking any civilians from Gaza into its territory. And despite that, by the way, they ended up doing that, but only this was allowed for rich Gazans who were able to afford $5,000 per person to escape. But the ordinary ones were never given a chance to escape or try another thing. But why, in general, Egypt all the time consistently talking about not taking displaced Gazans? I think, in my assessment, it's for three reasons. One, there is a worry in Egypt, skepticism from right-wing governments in Israel. There is a belief that they want to kick Palestinians out of Gaza. So they think in the Egyptian mindset, this will liquidate the Palestinian or the two-state solution. Two, Egypt worries if some of displaced Gazans get into Sinai or get into Egyptian territories, some Hamas members will hide among them and get into Egyptian territory. And this will cause Egypt even more trouble because these Hamas members will try to do two things. One, try to launch attacks on the Israeli side from Egyptian territory, and this will lead to an Israeli response. And if Israel responds within Egyptian territory, it will look bad on Egypt because its sovereignty will be questioned publicly, and the public will ask, why would you let the Israelis do that to you? And this could harm the peace treaty. So Egypt would rather not just have any thing with the Palestinians. Another thing also, they worry about having confrontation with these Palestinians who get into Egyptian territory, especially if some Hamas members get in, and they look at the region around them and they say historically, whenever Palestinians settled in some parts of the region, they got into conflicts with their host nations. And they take the example of Jordan in the 70s, when some Palestinian factions were there and they ended up clashing with the kingdom. And the kingdom had to get into bloody clash with them. They look at them in Lebanon and how also they were part of some bloody clashes in Lebanon. So Egypt would rather not to have anything when it comes to that. Interestingly, though, I would argue that Egypt is very comfortable with using the Palestinian plight for some propaganda reasons internationally, advocating for them, talking on their behalfs, going to the United Nations and try to push for certain resolutions against Israel. But in general, I wouldn't say that they are really interested in really helping them physically. Another last point is the reconstruction of Gaza. I think it's going to be a very beneficial thing for Egypt. And again, as I mentioned, the country has been struggling economically. Its foreign policy has struggling. And the reconstruction of Gaza is going to serve certain constituents from the Egyptian business sector. my argument is, and I always say, many military generals will be retiring and founding their own contracting companies. So whenever the reconstruction of Gaza comes in, they're going to be one of the first ones to get the contract bids. So this way they have some Egyptian workers who go work there or just make money out of it. So it's going to be interesting things, and it's worth witnessing how it will develop. The last topic I will discuss, and then I will start taking questions, is Qatar. Because that's a question I get a lot. Qatar support for Hamas, I wouldn't say that it started on October 7th, and I'm sure many knows that it dates back before that, and the funding used to happen before that. But I think the big picture thing is it dates back to the 90s when Qatar decided to play or look for a role to play in the region at the time as a small, young kingdom that has massive amount of wealth and trying to protect its sovereignty from other big guys in the region. So it found itself a niche, and the niche was that to support any Muslim Brotherhood entity in the region. Unfortunately, Muslim Brotherhood organizations in general are not committed to peace between Muslims and other religious groups in the region. Historically, when they come to power, they have a bad track record and end up destroying their societies. Look at the case of Gaza, for instance, a Muslim Brotherhood organization ruling the Gaza Strip for 20 years. What was the situation? And by the way, because not many people know that, the situation in Gaza was very bizarre economically wise and politically wise before the crisis of October 7th. And when I was looking at the newspapers in Gaza before October 7th, when you read it online, you'll find that there has been protests. Many young people were out on the streets demanding liberty, demanding food, demanding their basic rights, because the Hamas government was really cracking down with them. So but yet, even though they didn't have the perfect conditions, but people, at least it was better than now, at least they had a house, they had a school to go to, a street, a coffee shop to sit at, But the big point is Muslim Brotherhood organizations, whenever they rule a territory, sometimes in order to achieve their political goals, they are willing to sacrifice their entire public and their entire population. And such groups should not be in power and should not be encouraged in the region by a way or another. So going back to Qatar, the solution, and just to give you very quick ideas, I think the solution for its support to Muslim Brotherhood groups is the following. I think, in my humble opinion, one, their TV channel Al Jazeera has many Muslim Brotherhood anchors who preach radical ideas to young Arabs. The best thing to do is fire as many as we could from these radical TV anchors and hire open-minded ones. And you have a case study, by the way, Al Arabiya channel, which is funded by the Saudis. It used to have some crazy-minded TV anchors. In the past, I would say 6 to 7 years, you barely see them anymore, and they got a new set of smart, open-minded ones that really care about their own publics and the Arab street and try to preach things really could improve the lives of the people in the region, and actually don't talk bad about other religious minority groups in the region, Christians or Jews in this situation, or Druze or Baha'is or anybody else, Two, they should join the Abraham Accords. The amount of travel that happened between Doha and Jerusalem in the past 23 months makes the relationship between the two governments no longer a taboo, So why not join the Abraham Accords and start a new page in Israel and join the train of moderate Arabs who value relations with Israel. I think that's it for me, and I will be more than happy to take questions. I cannot hear you.
Sorry, thank you so much for your lecture. It was very enlightening. So we have some questions here. I will with the first. So why did you decide to study in Israel? How this experience changed your life?
So basically, I grew up in Egypt. I didn't know anything about Israel except what I saw on television. And all of a sudden, I traveled to America. And by the way, all what I saw on television was very negative, unfortunately. And all of a sudden, I go to America and I met Jews for the first time in my life. And I was curious, these, especially in Middle East departments, they study about Arab culture, they study about Islam, which is my religion, they know Arabic, which is my language. They even studied abroad. Some of the Jewish students I met studied abroad in Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, Jordan. So I was like fascinated. Why do they go to the lands where we come from? And why don't I do the opposite? So I said, you know what? I'm going to Tel Aviv University and studied. I applied, I got accepted, and I ended up going there. And I had a very enriching, tremendous experience.
Nice. So next question is, given the current dynamics and the impact of the war in Gaza, do you see any signs of a new Palestinian political leadership emerging, either within or outside the Palestinian territories that could... Sorry, let me just... The whole question, just a second.
Sure.
Sorry, that could reshape the future of Palestinian representation.
So given, could you say that question one more time?
So the last sentence is, we either within or outside the Palestinian territories that could reshape the Palestinian representation.
I see. I think inside Gaza nowadays, they are trying to create some alternative to Hamas. There is a group that, with the support of Israel, I forgot the name of it now, but there is a group now. Israel is funding it, giving it weapons. They're trying to create an alternative in some parts of Gaza, mainly in the Rafah part. This is one thing. I think one thing also moderate Arab states are trying to identify some people from the West Bank, some business men who have political influence within Palestinian politics. They try to recruit them in order to be like temporary rulers for the Gaza Strip. But in general, to answer the question, I don't think right away you will have a ready or a prepared Palestinian political leadership. What you will need is after Israel leaves the Gaza Strip and the war stops, a vacuum is going to be created. So this vacuum will need to be filled by moderate Arab states. And I always talk about that. Some Arab forces needs to be entered inside Gaza collectively. Egyptians, could be with the Saudis, with the Emiratis, with other Muslim countries that are willing to play a part in that. Try to filter and recruit some Palestinians to train them on security matters, to train them on governance. And if Hamas tries to create some chaos, because there is going to be remnants of Hamas, at least they will crack down on it, and they will ensure that they are dealt with as terror groups or outlawed individuals within Palestinian territories. But right away, I don't see an emerging leadership. And I don't think also the Palestinian Authority has the capacity to be ruling Gaza and the West Bank. One, very corrupt. Two, they don't have the capacity to do so. Egypt is working with them actually, and I think the Jordanians also working with them in training some security personnel from the Palestinian Authority to hire more, and to be ready to fill the gap after Israel leaves the Gaza Strip. But I don't see them ready. They will need some Arab backing at least for a few more years.
So the next question here is, how responsible is Egypt for what happens in Gaza regarding security and humanitarian aid?
As I mentioned in my talk, I think Egypt played a dangerous game. From one hand, they didn't like Hamas because Hamas is a Muslim Brotherhood group, and the Egyptian regime nowadays is against the Muslim Brotherhood. But also they saw that Hamas started to have relationship with other influential countries in the region, Qatar, Turkey, and Iran. So the Egyptians decided to at least give some opening to Hamas to do some of their activities with a blind eye, in order to have some leverage over Hamas as well. And I think the result or the outcome was disastrous, because we saw that October 7th, we saw that the weapons they got and the tunnels they dug for years without any censorship. So I think to some extent, Egypt has some responsibility when it comes to security situation, but also the humanitarian situation as well. I wrote an article after October 7th, a week or two, when Israel decided to do the ground operation inside the Gaza Strip, and I argued that Egypt should take some civilians from Gaza, and there were some rich Gulf countries were ready to fund their stay on Egyptian territories, temporary territory. So this way, we leave Hamas inside the Gaza Strip. We take as many innocent civilians, put them on Egyptian territory in safe haven. So Israel can fight Hamas and can hunt them quicker, instead of letting Hamas use its civilian population as a human shields and hide among the public. Unfortunately, Egypt rejected that, and I explained in my lecture as well the reasons that Egypt has when it comes to rejecting hosting Palestinian from Gaza, which I think some of it legit, but also in the meantime, sometimes we have to be humans, and the history of wars. We always find that refugees temporarily placed in the neighboring country until things get back to normal, and then they can go back. So I think the Egyptian stance was a little bit stubborn and led to massive death among Palestinian civilians, unfortunately, because Hamas is using them as human shields.
So the last question here for today is, do you believe that Benjamin Netanyahu is really interested in normalizing Israel's relations with Saudi Arabia?
If I try to read his mind, I think so, because it's a very historic deal. It's similar to the deal that Menachem Begin signed with Sadat back in the 70s, and how he entered history and won the Peace Prize. And I'm sure it's a legacy that he created. So I'm sure, as an Israeli citizen, he has such a dream in his mindset, for sure. But the question is, before October 7th, it was much easier, because one of the things that Netanyahu sold to the Saudis and other Arab countries that signed peace with him in the Abraham Accords was that he has influence in Washington, D.C. He can counter the Iranians, and he can find a way to bypass the Palestinian question. Nowadays, Bibi does not have that much influence in D.C. as it used to be before. With the Iranian situation, he already countered them, and Iran is weaker now. Iranian proxies are not as strong as it used to be. Actually, his government did a good job. So now, actually, it's making the Arab side that was really interested in getting closer to him. You already did it, And also another thing also is the Palestinian question. It's on the table again, and it will be very embarrassing for the Saudis, especially after October 7th, to sign a deal with Israel without getting something to the Palestinians. And I'm not sure Bibi can get that, because he has an extreme coalition in his government. And if he decides or he thinks anything to do in the Palestinian arena without their approval, this means the government will collapse and he will lose power. So he doesn't have much flexibility when it comes to giving the concessions the Saudis would expect of him, so they can normalize a deal with him.
Thank you so much, Professor Hassanein, for your time, for sharing your knowledge and insights with us today. It was great. Agradeço também a todos que participaram, dessa live aqui com a gente hoje, e convido a continuarem acompanhando a programação do IB aqui no canal. Uma boa noite para todos e até a próxima atividade. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.